Prime Minister called it a great day for Canada and a great day for Alberta. Mark Carney made this statement and an announcement with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. The pair signed a memorandum of understanding which would pave the way for a pipeline through Alberta and B.C. Premier Scott Moe has been outspoken in his support of this potential project. For more, we're joined by our weekly panel, Murray Mandryk, a political columnist, and we are also joined by Jeremy Symes, who covers the legislature in Saskatchewan for the Canadian Press. Jeremy, let's start with you. What are the main details of this deal, and what's been the Premier's response here in Saskatchewan?
Yeah, for sure. The main details is it would support, this new pipeline, like you mentioned, to the West Coast. And they're looking at having this pipeline. It has to be privately owned, so they don't want to have any government money go into this thing. They're also looking at having Indigenous co-ownership. That's also a big factor in getting this pipeline done. Now, at the same time, Canada is also going to pause some of its environmental policies on Alberta. So Alberta doesn't have to follow the clean electricity regulations. It doesn't have to follow the oil and gas emissions cap. But at the same time, it's going to have to pay a higher industrial carbon price. So those companies, those heavy emitters, are going to have to pay more for the carbon they produce. So that's the bargain, I guess, that they're making there. Both Premier Smith and Prime Minister Carney say this signals a shift in their relationship. It's going to spur the economy and also meet some of the climate goals as well. Now, Premier Scott Moe, very supportive of this. He always has been. And he says, Premier Smith and Prime Minister Carney deserve credit for this deal. And he says, the tone with Ottawa has changed quite dramatically from today to compared to the last decade under former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And he says, as a Canadian, he's just very thankful for this new tone, for this new era of collaboration.
And Murray, BC's Premier David Eby coming out against this, says he's been left on the sidelines in this discussion. Can this pipeline get done without buy-in from, let's say, Indigenous leaders in the area, the BC Premier and others?
Well, you're hitting it on the head. Politicians come and go. Economics doesn't change. And the economics of this deal is still that no one wants to invest a whole bunch of billions into something that's not going to be economically beneficial. Plus, you throw in the caveat that Jeremy mentioned in relation to having a First Nations component, having no government involvement. This isn't sort of a project that's going to go through anytime quickly under any other circumstances. The politics is more interesting. Politics is interesting locally because while the NDP are talking about, well, why aren't we building the pipeline with steel made at Evraz here? You're dealing with an NDP premier who is basically talking about not wanting this pipeline at all. So, batter up. You just walked into the batter's box while the guy was swinging. It's going to be a bit of a mess for him. But I think even more interesting to me is the national politics of it. We've seen Stephen Guilbeault resign over this, so that's a significant change federally. In fact, I think it's the demarcation between the previous Trudeau administration and the Carney administration in terms of how different they are. I think that the signal that it's offering to Danielle Smith gives her some space in terms of the obvious political problems she's having on the far right. Obviously, Scott Moe is embracing this because it is, something that works for him, and it's more underscores this real change in relationship attitude that he's having with the federal government. So far more interesting than whether the pipeline gets built or not now, which it won't because once again, the economics just isn't there to build it, is the political impact locally, federally, and in Western Canada politics that this is now going to have.
And I saw people, online saying yesterday that maybe folks in Alberta would be as happy as the pipeline potentially coming as Stephen Guilbeault, who's been a target for pro-pipeline people in the past. Jeremy, switching gears here this week, the Finance Minister, Jim Ryder, here in Saskatchewan, provided a mid-year financial update. It showed a pretty significant deficit. What is he pointing to as the reason for that?
Yeah, $427 million deficit. The government originally projected a $12 million surplus, so big swing there. The main reason this time around why it's increasing is the government's spending more on wildfires this year that they fought in the summer, $295 million more dollars there. And they're also planning to spend an extra $250 million on healthcare, mostly to deal with the hospital pressures we're seeing in Regina and Saskatchewan specifically. Also, the total exports are down in value of $1.4 billion. So that means oil and gas prices are down. The government's projections were way up than what they are today. So we are getting less money that way. Despite all this, Ryder says, the economy is still doing well. The net debt to GDP ratio is fine. And Saskatchewan's deficit is much lower compared to other provinces. So he says, he wishes it would be a surplus, but it's nothing to be super upset over.
So a positive spin there from the finance minister, Murray. You sat in this chair that you're sitting in right now, and the week the budget came out and said that this wasn't going to be the reality in the future, the very near future. It turns out. What do you make of that explanation that Jeremy said from the minister?
Well, as you watch me bend spoons with my mind for years, it's like the Amazing Kreskin. CBC reference here for listeners for the 70s. No, you don't have to be incredibly brilliant to see that this was going to fall off the table. It was ridiculous at the time. Right now, in this week in the legislature, we have farmers coming in from Big Stick in the south west corner of the province complaining about 10 years of drought, and you didn't have a drought contingency fund. You didn't have a forest fire contingency fund, and all of a sudden you realize, holy cow, we got a whole bunch of extra budget costs with forestry. You overpriced oil at the time when Donald Trump is still in his drill baby drill mode, and maybe this isn't about the cost of tariffs, but it certainly is the cost of other U.S. policies affecting Saskatchewan. You could see all this coming. Everybody could see all this coming, and the lunacy of the whole thing is predicting a surplus at the time by the Sask party government and pretending that somehow things were going to work out when the chances of it working out were remote. That said, I think the opposition is missing up an opportunity here. We're now paying more than $1 billion on our financial charge credit card bill, our interest payments on past deficits, and this adds to them. That would be a great focus for any effective opposition to basically say, look, here's the things that we could buy if you guys would just simply manage the finances better. And they could do that as opposition without having to take responsibility for anything other than the reality that we have a bad budget situation because we have bad budgeting right now. I think the governors are off right now with Donna Harpower no longer in the financial chair and Jim Ryder maybe being a little bit more willing or eager to present this kind of budget, or the budget deliberation process being a little bit more eager to somehow say post-election that we needed to present a false surplus budget. That's usually what they do before an election. Mm-hmm. Why they're doing it after, I have no idea. But politically speaking, it wasn't wise. It wasn't wise economically. Everyone could see it coming, and now they're basically bearing the cost of this. You'd think the opposition would be benefiting from more, but they don't seem to. This is once again more of the political story that's going on, but a really difficult economic one that we really need to get our heads around as taxpayers because it's costing us. One of the reasons we can't afford some of the stuff that we want, like healthcare, like other things, like housing, like childcare, is because we don't have the money right now because we're not budgeting effectively.
And speaking of affordable childcare, we're expecting an announcement today. The Premier hinted at that. That would be an extension of the $10 a day deal with the federal government. What's been the reaction to this since the Premier came out and announced it in the House the other day?
Yeah, Education Minister Everett Hindley, he says this is something the government has always wanted to do. They've always wanted to get a deal done. They say they take this issue very seriously. And, he says the reason it took longer for Saskatchewan to get this deal done is because he wanted to work harder on maybe negotiate a better deal on the province's behalf. There was also a federal election, so that could have delayed things a bit, he's also saying. So we don't know any of the details. I know the government was looking at potentially money for private operators, maybe having kids who are 6 getting covered under this childcare deal, but we don't know what that's going to look like. childcare operators themselves are looking forward to the details as well. They've been having a lot of anxiety over this, not having this deal for some time. They need money where there's no strings attached. They need more guarantees for their pay scale is what they're saying. And the opposition NDP has said, the government dragged its heels on this. It could have signed it sooner and it could have provided that much more certainty. But I think everyone's looking to see what the details will be today.
Yeah, we'll get those details fairly shortly. And another thing came up this week is rent controls, that the opposition put out a bill that they're hoping the government was going to agree to. Then you had some seniors come to the legislature and discuss their concerns. And we had this on the news this week, and I found, some of the revelations about rent doubling to be pretty surprising. What's behind this?
Yeah, for sure. So these group of seniors you mentioned, they're living in a housing complex here in Regina, which actually the Archdiocese, the Catholic Archdiocese partially owns. But they were being subsidized by Saskatchewan Housing Authority. So their rents for some were around $500 a month, some were around $750 a month. Now Sask Housing is not going to cover that subsidy. So now their rents are kind of going up to more of market value. So we're having $1,100 to $1,000. So like you mentioned, some doubling there. Overall, rents in the province just much higher, especially Regina and Saskatoon, than they were 5 years ago. And so the NDP is calling for this rent control, that the government needs to do a rent control bill. And the government's not interested in that. But they say it's very concerning, and you're just kind of seeing these issues pile up, I think.
Yeah, I think the minister said something like, this is not good for investment if you're going to have rent control. We've heard that argument before, Murray. Rent doubling for some seniors in this case. So what do you make of it?
Well, the government's argument is housing starts, and we're not going to see housing starts. Most of the province, we're not seeing housing starts anyway. 97% of the housing starts in Saskatchewan right now are in the Regina, Saskatoon bedroom community area. The rest of the province is not producing anything, and that means virtually nothing in rural Saskatchewan, where the base of the Sask party support is. They want to win back the cities, yet somehow they don't understand that there's significant problems, somewhat different problems in Saskatoon, Regina, and area, because people are struggling, as Jeremy outlined, to have a place to live. And if you're on the lower end of the income, you're struggling even more. And yet they're under this fallacy that the problem is going to slow down the creation of dwellings for people, when in reality it's an economic problem that's much broader based. So this is a big win for the NDP, I think, to keep hammering on this particular issue. But, and here's a big caveat, I don't know if it's really registering with most people out there as to where this could be an issue for them. People don't think in terms of how they might benefit from rent control, and most people don't rent. So this is very much of a niche political thing for the NDP to be raising, and probably the people that are affected are probably people that are more inclined to support them anyway. I think the childcare, by the way, is probably a bigger win, because all the government did was drag their heels on this for 2 years, wind up, by the looks of it, signing the same deal they would have signed 2 years ago after the NDP beat them up over 2 years on this particular nonsense. And anybody with kids right now understands the need for more affordable daycare if they want to basically earn enough money and take home enough money to pay that rent that we're talking about. So these are sort of at-home economic issues that I think can be winners for the NDP if they capitalize for this. I don't think the government is getting it, and this is not, once again, where they're strong. And I think that they're really not in tune with particular issues like this that tend to be urban-based.
Murray, Jeremy, thank you for your time.
You're very welcome.